Coronavirus cases in Nigeria cross 10,000 mark as NCDC confirms 307 new cases.
More segments of the economy may be reopened as task force on COVID-19 briefs President Buhari.
We've not reached the peak yet. And I wouldn't want to fool Nigerians by telling them that we are out of the woods. No, we are not out of the woods.
Medical doctor dies of COVID-19 in Jigawa.
And on Good Morning Nigeria today, we shall focus on the judiciary in our series on the 5th anniversary of the Buhari administration.
Last Friday, we began analysis of the last 5 years of the Buhari administration with a general appraisal of the strides of the administration cutting across infrastructural development, especially in the transportation sector.
That's right, Kirian. As we indicated just a while ago in our headlines, today we shall continue our series on the administration with a special focus on that arm of government that is considered usually as the last hope of the common man, that is to say, the judiciary.
That's right, Kingsley. And talking about the judiciary as the last hope of the common man, over the decades, there has been a struggle for the soul of the judiciary among politicians, whether in government or in the opposition, all in a bid to influence and control the inclinations of the bar and bench. But has the judiciary in the last 5 years been able to survive the onslaught against its pedigree and principles?
Well, Kirian, that's a billion naira question. And of course, we recall that government itself, through its various agencies, made recourse to rescue the soul of the judiciary sometime in the first tenure of the Buhari administration, when in the dead of the night, operatives of the Department of State Services stormed the residences of 2 justices of the Supreme Court as well as 2 judges of the Federal High Court, who were then alleged to have compromised their integrity in the performance of their duties on the bench.
And while some Nigerians outrightly condemned the nocturnal operation and the commando-style invasion of the privacy of the revered justices and judges at that time, not a few Nigerians agreed that the judiciary was overdue to be purged of corrupt officials, if only to retain faith in its age-long integrity, sanctity, and neutrality as the last hope of the common man.
Well, Kirian, none of those justices whose residences were raided were ever convicted. But perhaps as another indication of the determination of the Buhari administration to purge the judiciary and keep it above board as one of the 3 arms of government, the head of the judicial branch itself came under trial over failure to declare his assets as required by law. And here we're talking about former Chief Justice of Nigeria, Honorable Justice Walter Onoren, who eventually tendered his letter of resignation, which was accepted by President Buhari.
And I recall that a lot of Nigerians read political undertone to the brouhaha, if you like, at that time. But it was a clear message to the nation that the Buhari administration will spare no effort to purge and strengthen the judiciary, no matter whose ox is gold.
Of course, we've had various justice sector reforms under the administration, all of which point in one direction, that is to say the establishment of a rule of law regime that ensures that all goes well. In particular, we also have, for instance, the Presidential Advisory Committee Against Corruption, which is PACAC, which has also helped in advancing the fight against corruption, as well as the application of the Administration of Criminal Justice Act 2015, plus the setting up of various measures and strategies to ensure that assets which are forfeited, having been fraudulently acquired by public officials or private individuals, do of course get back into the public coffers.
That's indeed right, Kingsley. And the Minister of Justice has also been very instrumental in facilitating the repatriation of the nation's stolen funds and the commonwealth stashed in foreign countries, such as the Abuja loot, of which many tranches have been returned and plowed channeled into national development.
Well, we have also seen a number of executive orders issued by the president in order to eliminate the usual bureaucracy that normally would bog down government operations. One of such executive orders is Executive Order 10, signed by the president to ensure the implementation of the guarantee of financial autonomy of state legislatures and judiciary.
Of course, and we can go on and on, Kingsley, to even mention the criminal justice and prison reforms which guaranteed presidential amnesty for 2,600 prisoners nationwide in the bid to decongest the facilities of the Nigeria Correctional Service.
And so, part of the question, of course, we'll be asking will be what impact has the judicial branch of government made on national development in the 5 years that President Buhari has been in office? And how has the judiciary itself been positioned to provide the necessary checks and balances for the country's democracy? This, of course, and more will form the focus of our conversation on Good Morning Nigeria today as we review 5 years of the Buhari administration, once again with the focus on the judiciary. I'm Kingsley Osadolo. I welcome you to this edition of the program, which is our very first for the week and indeed for the very first in the month of June.
Yes, and I am Kurian Umayo. Thanks a lot for joining us this morning. We broadcast live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. The program is Good Morning Nigeria. For now, let's bring in Ifoma, who has the news for this morning. Ifoma.
Good morning, Kingsley and Kirian. Here is the morning news. As at the night of Sunday, 31st May 2020, the Nigeria Center for Disease Control, NCDC, announced 307 new cases of COVID-19 in the country, bringing the number of confirmed cases to 10,162. Of the 307 new cases, Lagos has 188, FCT 44, Ogun 19, Kaduna 14, Oyo 12, Bayelsa 9, while Gombe recorded 5 cases. Kano and Delta have 3 new coronavirus cases each. Imo, Rivers, Niger and Bauchi have 2 cases each, while Plateau and Kwara have 1 case each. Lagos still tops the COVID-19 cases chart table with 4,943 cases, followed by Kano with 954 cases and the FCT with 660 cases. 3,007 patients who recovered have been discharged, with 287 deaths so far. President Muhammadu Buhari on Sunday engaged members of the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19 on further measures of containing the pandemic as 2 weeks extension of the ease of lockdown ends today. The chairman of the task force and secretary to the government of the Federation, Boss Mustafa, led members to the meeting where feelers emerged that more segments of the economy may be reopened as the battle against the uncommon health challenge rages on.
After we receive Mr. President, we will now know which segment of the economy he has allowed to open.
Is Nigeria winning this fight against COVID-19?
We are winning. We are winning. As a matter of fact, you just suppose the rate of cases with our fatality rates, which is basically about 3%. Other countries and other climes is over 10%. We've not reached the peak yet. And I wouldn't want to fool Nigerians by telling them that we are out of the woods. No, we are not out of the woods. As we even open up and accommodate more enterprises, because we are trying to have a balance between livelihoods and lives.
Meanwhile, the Jigawa State chapter of the Nigeria Medical Association has confirmed the death of one of its members in Jigawa State, Dr. Nasir Adam, who died of COVID-19 infection. The deceased, aged 36 years, who was a staff of the Federal Medical Center, Birnin Kudu, developed respiratory infection problem and was later confirmed to be coronavirus positive, leading to his death. Correspondent Abdullahi Garba Birnin Kudu reports that this is the first medical personnel to die of COVID-19 in Jigawa State. In the meantime, the Kano State Commissioner for Information, Mohammed Garba, says 1,018 samples from suspected COVID-19 cases were submitted to the 3 testing centers in the state for testing between May 23rd and 30th. He says, based on available data from the State Task Force on COVID-19, out of that figure, 72 were found to be positive. 881 of the samples tested came out negative. 42 are on follow-up tests, while 28 tests have to be repeated. And as part of efforts to impact its host communities, the Eastern Naval Command is set to inaugurate a 200-bed capacity boys' hostel at the Nigerian Navy Secondary School, Abuja, in Cross River State to mark the 64th anniversary of the Nigerian Navy. The flag officer commanding Eastern Naval Command, Rear Admiral David Adeniro, disclosed this during a virtual meeting with unit commanders in his jurisdiction.
Within the command, we shall be commissioning the sick bay at the headquarters.
And that's the morning news. The program continues with Kinsley and Kirian after this break.
Main way coronavirus spread is when infected people sneeze and cough. Small droplets of fluid expelled by cough or sneezes are laced with viruses looking for new respiratory tracts to infect. When a sick person sneezes around someone who is healthy, the virus can land in the nose, mouth, or even the eyes, causing an infection. Symptoms can include fever, cough, shortness of breath. Symptoms may appear within 2 to 14 days. Seek medical advice if you develop symptoms and have been in close contact with a person known to have COVID-19, or if you live or have recently been in an area with ongoing spread of COVID-19. This message is brought to you by the Nigerian Television Authority, NTA, Africa's largest television network. In this time of despair, our country, Nigeria, needs us now more than ever. We stand a chance to save our great country, Nigeria. A chance to rise up from this pandemic stronger and better. What will be the gain if we do not learn from other countries and observe the lockdown to stop the further spread of the virus? If we loosen our guards and allow this virus doom our very existence, then what have we gained? This is the call to every Nigerian to unite as one and stop the spread of this deadly virus. Stay at home and stay safe. Remember, the virus doesn't move unless we move. This message is brought to you by the Nigerian Television Authority, NTA, Africa's largest television network. We have observed the lockdown. We have practiced the measures in order to curb the spread of the virus, but we can do better. The coronavirus spread is increasing daily, and only together can we cut down the numbers and defeat the spread of the virus. Remember, COVID-19 is not a death sentence, and a recovered patient cannot spread the disease. Do not stigmatize. Do not hesitate to report any case or if you have come in contact with anybody that has been infected with COVID-19. If you have cough and fever, please stay at home and call your state hotline. Find state numbers at www.covid19.ncdc.gov.ng. Remember, it is for your own good and for the good of every Nigerian. Let us do better and defeat the virus. Together, we can do this. This message is brought to you by the Nigerian Television Authority, NTA, Africa's largest television network.
Do you not know that our enemies have no face? They are indigents of no state. They come from no place. And if this boat capsizes, every one of us will go under. So when the drums sound, let everybody answer. Do not say, I am the Iroko when the forest is burning. Do not say, I am the Obeche when the forest is burning. Our differences will not stop us from perishing together. So when the drums sound, let everybody answer.
You're watching Good Morning Nigeria live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. Next is business news, and here is our correspondent, Kolo Muhammad.
Good to know you're there. Nigeria, under the Muhammadu Buhari administration, has improved in ranking in the ease of doing business and has triggered the opening of previously closed business outfits as well as the birth of new industrial commitments. The Ease of Doing Business initiative also reduced the cost of business startups through digital marketing.
When you're starting your business online, if you're talking to everybody, you're talking to nobody. So you need to have like your target audience at the back of your mind.
Another achievement of the Muhammadu Buhari administration is in the micro, small and medium enterprises sector, where the federal government has trained entrepreneurs, hosted clinics, provided loans and given general support and palliatives to businesses previously threatened by the coronavirus pandemic. As the federal and state governments continue to race around the clock to flatten the curve and eliminate COVID-19, business and growth opportunities have presented themselves open to be tapped for national development. Finally, the week's activity on the floor of the Nigerian Stock Exchange opens today. NTA Business News will bring you closing figures subsequently. In appreciation of having you along, I am Kolo Muhammad. Many thanks.
Thank you, Kolo Mohammed, for that report. And next on Good Morning Nigeria is newspaper review.
Our newspaper reviewer, Baya Toyebe, is here with us. Baya, good morning and welcome.
Thank you, Kinsley. Good morning. Good morning, Kyria. Good morning, Nigeria.
Baya, you're welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, let's begin with the leadership newspaper from top to bottom. The lead story is Nigerians brace up for reopening of businesses with several riders. States to take responsibility of next phase of easing of lockdown, says federal government. And it says, despite rising cases, Nigeria winning war against COVID-19. Partial lockdown unsustainable, say experts, stakeholders. We've lost billions to markets closure. Spare parts dealers lament. Pope warns against reopening of economy, says people's lives matter most. 74% of COVID-19 cases from unknown source, NCDC. People with travel history constitute 2%. Contact, 24%. Experts advises on proper use of face mask. Now, 18 years after, Ayede relocates Bakassi IDPs to new homes. And now, at the bottom of the newspaper, we have Presidency falls. Dangote says Southwest tops PMB's appointment. It's on page 10. Dangote wins World Travel Market Award with CNN commercial. That's on page 35. George Floyd, 25 U.S. cities under curfew amid raging protest. That's on page 46. And return to roundtable or face consequences, federal government tells ASU. That's on page 10. And PDP sweeps Benue Cross River local government elections. That's on page 2.
Okay, the Nation newspaper is next, and above the nameplate says government to invoke labor law on lecturers. With the rider 800 billion naira debt incurred. That's in page 7. Tension in Senate over 2020 budget. Lawan, the Senate president, seeks truce. Policeman kills colleague in shooting spree. Details on page 4. That happened in Lagos. And below the nameplates, where you have the lead story, it says federal government hands over COVID-19 battle to states. Buhari's decision on schools and worship centers expected. And 20 local government areas account for 60% of cases. Tinubu to governors. Primaries crucial to democracy. With two riders, Obaseki and Akeredolu, to brace for shadow polls. APC governors praise Sanwo-Olu on COVID-19. And right at the foot of the front page, Sultan to security agencies, trail bandits to their roots. That's on page 26. And then you have the usual sidebar there indicating in numbers, number of infections, around the world on COVID-19, over 6.2 million. Number of deaths, over 372,000, while over 2,000, that's over 2.7 million have recovered. In Nigeria, we have surpassed 10,000. Number of deaths, 287. And then you have the active cases there, around about 6,888. Okay, Bayo.
Yes, indeed, Nigeria, we scaled the 10,000 mark. Yesterday, 307 new cases were reported, and that brings our national figure to 10,162. Last Friday, which was the last time we met here, by evening we had 387 new cases, 5 deaths. On Saturday, we had the highest ever, 553 cases with 12 deaths. And Sunday, yesterday, we had 307 cases with 14 deaths. Therefore, between Friday and this morning, we have had 1,247 cases. There seems to be no indication that we have reached the peak, and at which point we'll begin to flatten the curve and begin to descend. There's, however, some cheering news. Kebbi State has no COVID-19 patient currently in isolation. The last two were discharged from Kalgo Medical Center. The Commissioner for Health, Jafar Mohammed, announced this. So far, Kebbi has had 33 cases and 4 deaths, and presently they have no one in isolation. Meanwhile, the ease of restriction and curfew imposed about a fortnight ago may be reviewed today. The Chairman, Presidential Task Force, and the Secretary to Government of the Federation says that he briefed President Muhammad Buhari yesterday, and indications are that Nigeria could move to a second phase of the ease of lockdown. Boss Mustafa, however, explained that already a substantial part of the economy had already been opened, especially he cited the area of allowing agricultural production, and areas of fertilizer and oil production have never closed. He says after approval by President, sectors to be opened will remain known to the public. Meanwhile, he also commented on the issue about Kogi and Cross River State, which claim that there is no COVID-19 in their territory. And he says there is no island as far as COVID-19 is concerned. In health matters, what happens in any locality has consequences of skidding to others. The different responses must be interwoven to have one common broad approach. So far, Lagos too is having, I think it is Ogun State now, that is having challenges. Resident doctors in Ogun State have also embarked on strike. Those of the Olabisi Onabanjo University Teaching Hospital went on strike. They first gave a warning strike and declared weekend strike. Governor Dapo Abiodun has described that as irresponsible and politically motivated. The Association of Resident Doctors said the government has refused to yield to their demand for improved welfare package. Governor Abiodun says government has done everything to meet their demands. Embarking on weekend strike is irresponsible and probably politically motivated. Meanwhile, there have been reactions across board. The associations of doctors, Nigerian Medical Association, Midwife, and as well as Nurses and Midwife Association and Pharmaceutical Society of Nigeria have all remarked about opening up. Professor Innocent Uja of the Nigerian Medical Association says government must swiftly sensitize churches and mosques on opening by observing social distancing and use of face masks. Abdul Rafiu Adeniji, president of the Nurses and Midwife Association, says opening of churches and mosques should be gradual. However, Secretary for the Pharmaceutical Society of Nigeria, Emeka Duru, says churches are ready for opening.
All right, Bayo, we may have to stop you there because of the time and go to the editorials. I thought we were going to speak to the issue of the first phase of the easing being the responsibility of states now, as may have been directed by the federal government.
Yes, that's what the Secretary of the Government hinted, but the brief will come from either from the Presidential Task Force or in the broadcast from the President, as has been the case.
Okay, the editorial is talking about the repeal of ex-governors and speakers' pension laws. Of course, the latest is that of Imo State.
Well, the editorial is happening on and praising the initiative, the last initiative by the governor of Imo State that has now repealed the law that allows ex-governors and speakers to earn what they describe as life pension. The Imo State government has repealed that law. Before that, Zamfara State also took the initiative sometime last year by saying that it cannot afford to pay about 700 million naira per annum to political office holders. Kwara State, in its own initiative, only suspended such expenses. And one editorial is saying that in spite of a court of appeal has described the provisions in those laws as homologous and offensive to good conscience. Also, a judge on the Federal High Court has actually directed the Attorney General of Federation to challenge the viability of that law in court. All said, it means that with COVID-19 forcing economic hardships on the nation, no nation, or Nigeria specifically, and the states whose resources are now dwindled cannot afford to fund such largesse. Specifically, if you compare it, a political office holder like the governors and the speakers they have served only 8 years, and they grant themselves millions of naira.
What are other members of House of Assembly? Okay. Is the speaker, perhaps because he was a speaker, so that's why he's superior to the first among. So they can also extend that to the members of the House of Assembly.
So what the editorial is saying, I felt that Nigeria cannot afford such luxury, and therefore something has to be done about it.
All right, Baya, I would like to thank you. I hope we're all keeping watch on what is happening in the United States. Yes. Where the country, of course, is in turmoil on account of frequent, almost institutionalized police brutality against blacks. Yesterday, there were demonstrations in central London against the police brutality, of black Americans, and indeed there are other protests being planned elsewhere.
It's actually becoming riots.
Global. That's right.
Becoming global.
Yes. 25 cities in the United States. And guess what? The wife of the policeman has also filed for a divorce.
Exactly.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, the best headline that we have seen from all of that, unfortunate as it is I cannot breathe.
Exactly.
All right, Baya Toby, thank you for being with us. See you tomorrow.
Thank you too.
Okay, it's Good Morning Nigeria live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. We'll take a short break now. When we return, we'll deal with our topic for discussion.
The coronavirus, also known as COVID-19, is spreading at an alarming rate all over the globe, including Nigeria. With the number of infected persons in Nigeria increasing daily, prevention is better than cure. Coronavirus has no cure. The virus spreads from one person, who affects two persons, and by the time the affected person is isolated, the two persons have affected four, and it keeps spreading. You must take preventive measures to save yourself and that of the people around you. Always wash your hands with soap and water. Put distance between yourself and others. Whenever you cough or sneeze, cover your mouth. Clean and disinfect surfaces. Stay at home if you're sick and contact the proper authorities. Together, we can cut down the spread of the coronavirus. This message is brought to you by the Nigerian Television Authority, NTA, Africa's largest TV network.
Welcome, dear. Have you washed your hands?
I'm inside my house again. This thing not the key black man.
I don't know if it's misinformation or poor hygiene that will kill you first. Coronavirus is real, and good hygiene practice will save your life. Anyway, no hand washing, no eating.
I will not take care of it. That's what I parents.
Coronavirus is real and it's on the rise. But you can help yourself and help others to be safe. Remember, we can stop the spread. It's in your hands.
This message is from the Akinfade Foundation in partnership with the National Orientation Agency with support from MacArthur Foundation.
Coronavirus is real. Steps to avoid this pandemic. Wash your hands regularly or sanitize your hands. Keep social and physical distancing. Avoid crowded places. Stay at home unless absolutely necessary. Don't touch your eyes, nose, or mouth if your hands are not clean. Avoid the spread of coronavirus. Coronavirus is real.
There is a lot of fake news and report circulating, especially on social media, on the coronavirus. Do not believe or partake in the spread of these fake reports. If it is not on the official website or news from the Nigerian Center for Disease Control, NCDC, disregard such report. Only together can we beat this virus. Only together can we overcome this pandemic. Follow the instructions and guidelines provided to combat this virus. Most importantly, stay at home. Self-isolate, regardless of your status. The virus doesn't move unless we move. Let us work together to better Nigeria. Together, we can do this. This message is brought to you by the Nigerian Television Authority, NTA, Africa's largest television network.
We thank you for staying with us on Good Morning Nigeria up to this moment. And our conversation this morning borders on 5 years of Buhari administration with focus on the judiciary. And to set the mood for our discussion, here is Abdulmalik Adio with the background report.
One of the campaign mandate heralding the Buhari administration in 2015 is a strong judiciary to effectively fight corruption, overhaul and transform the judiciary in the country, charting the roadmap to a dynamic justice system 5 years down the line. The establishment of the Presidential Advisory Committee Against Corruption was the first time set up by the Buhari administration to drive the reform agenda on anti-corruption crusade. Experts say, beyond the recovery of looted funds, the fight against corruption has been largely successful due to diligent investigation and prosecution of cases that has sent many to jail. The Presidential Advisory Committee also trained federal and state prosecutors, reviewed existing laws, incited whistleblower policy, domestic legislations, and international agreement. The mutual assistance in criminal matters, an executive bill signed into law by President Muhammadu Buhari, facilitated the identification, tracing, freezing, recovery, forfeiture, and confiscation proceeds of crime and prosecution of offenders. Experts say the first fundamental reform of the Nigerian Prisons Act in almost 50 years, resulting into the Nigerian Correctional Service to replace the Nigerian Prison Service, and the launch of the new Prisons Information Management System, a pilot project for administration of correctional service, was novel, with 86 Nigerian Correctional Service in different locations of 16 states of the Federation expected to benefit from it. Also in a bid to decongest Nigerian prisons population, President Muhammadu Buhari this year granted 2,600 prisoners amnesty, accounting for 3.5% inmate in Nigeria. With the signing into law of Executive Order 10 of 2020 by President Muhammadu Buhari, implementing financial autonomy for state legislature and judiciary is an attestation of his commitment to strengthen democracy and democratic governance in Nigeria.
Okay, we have with us in the studios this morning to discuss this topic the Attorney General of the Federation and Honorable Minister of Justice, Abubakar Malame, learned senior advocate of Nigeria. Honorable Minister, a pleasure to have you again on Good Morning Nigeria.
My pleasure having me. Thank you.
Also here with us in the studios is a regular face on our program, Professor Osere Meosumbo. He's a professor of law, former governor of Edo State, and also former chairman of the Nigerian Law Reform Commission. Prof, pleasure to have you with us on the program one more time.
Morning. Okay. And also with us here in Abuja is Professor Yemi Akinshaye George, a senior advocate of Nigeria. Good morning and welcome to the program.
Good morning. Thank you.
And from our Kano studio is Professor Mohammed Tabu, senior advocate of Nigeria, who is in the Faculty of Law, Bayero University, Kano, and co-chair, Federal Justice Sector Reform Coordinating Committee. You are welcome, Prof. Yeah.
All right, gentlemen, once again, our pleasure to have you with us for this program. Let's begin with the Chief Law Officer of the Federation, who is the Attorney General. Honorable Minister, 5 years on, what are the milestones in the judicial sector of our country?
Well, going down the history as it relates to the major milestones relating to the justice sector generally, I think it is indeed a history of successes, and successes in that matter that could be attributed to collective action. Collective action in which the judiciary in its own right, the executive, and indeed the legislature were partners in progress as it relates to the recorded successes. How do I mean? Looking at the legislature, for example, it is indeed established fact that the legislature as an institution has indeed played vital and critical role in the successes that eventually are being recorded in the administration of justice. You have in place effective legislations that turns the fortune of the justice administration in the polity. If you are looking at it from the point of independence of the judiciary, constitutional amendment arising from the fourth alteration, which translated to the promulgation of Section 121, subsection 3 of the Constitution, has indeed provided the impetus for the independence of the judiciary at the state level, the independence of the legislature at the state level. So with the passing of Section 121, subsection 3 of the Constitution, the coast is now clear that the desired independence that is a necessary tool for dispensation, impartial dispensation of justice has indeed been brought to bear in the justice sector administration in the country. Now, if you are talking of the executive, the fact that the bill as promulgated, as prepared by the legislature was indeed assented by the executive, establishes the role of the executive in the advancement of the cause of justice as far as this country is concerned. And that has further been consolidated by bringing about instruments that will now eventually translate to effective and efficient independence and autonomy of the justice sector at the state level. How do I mean? His Excellency, the President, has indeed put in place Executive Order number 10, the spirit of which is in effect that the same thing that obtains at the federal level, whereby the funding of the judiciary at the federal level is indeed a first-line charge on the consolidated revenue of the government, will equally trickle down and translate to the same position at the state level, that judiciary at the state level will be beneficiary of a first-line charge on the consolidated revenue of state, thereby establishing in them the desired independence, the desired determination of their own fate as it relates to administration of justice, as it relates to the welfare of the judicial staff, as it relates to general impartiality, the general decision as it relates to the administration of justice. So in essence, you can see a picture has been successfully established by this administration, whereby the key components of the state, the executive, the legislature, and indeed the judiciary, are accorded the desired independence that is necessary for the art of deepening the democratic system as far as the Nigerian state is concerned. So in essence, it is indeed a journey that has seen that has brought about the desired independence, the desired autonomy, and indeed the desired expansion of the administration of justice within the spirit and the context of striking the balance as it relates to separation of powers.
All right, Minister, I will still stay with you. Of course, as Kingsley said, you are the Chief Law Officer of the country. I would like to stay with you for a while. We just harped so much on the fact that there is the issue of autonomy, the judiciary and the judiciary at the state level. Even though governors are contesting that, but we'll move into that in the course of this conversation. But for now, I want to ask you a question concerning the desire of this administration to purge the judiciary of the bad element, whose misdemeanor is trying to, place a judiciary in the wrong side of the law. In fact, judiciary at a point was losing the age-long integrity, sanctity, and its neutrality in handling matters at that level. Now, what would you say this government has done in the last 5 years to ensure that this purging becomes effective and effectual as we go on as a nation?
Well, the major policy decision that has been taken by this government in ensuring the sustenance and indeed perhaps restoration of the integrity of the judicial system were multiple. But then among the major policy decisions that were taken, perhaps, was a decision that the executive is no longer operating a rubber stamp approach to judicial appointment for that matter. Before now, the conventional practice as far as the appointment of judicial officers is concerned is somehow a one-sided affair by which the NJC, Judicial Council, takes a decision, process and profile judicial officers and submits them to the president for approval or confirmation. And the practice was for the president to take it hook and sinker. But for the first time, I think, in the history of Nigeria, a new policy decision is now brought to bear by the president, by which the executive organ of government, inclusive of the enforcement agencies, EFCC, ICPC, police, DSS, are accorded an opportunity, even after the processing of the names by the NJC, these agencies or institutions or enforcement agencies are accorded an opportunity of vetting the personalities that are presented for consideration. And I think an added consideration is equally brought to bear as it relates to legal compliances associated with appointment. For example, at a point, there were certain embarrassments that set into the system by which people that are legally not supposed to be appointed were indeed accommodated in the system, people that have not undergone the mandatory National Youth Service Scheme. So arising from those considerations, the need has arisen for agencies to be accommodated in the art of filtration, the filtering the judicial officers. And that has indeed fed off, because along the line, those appointments that were presented for consideration of the president were indeed vetted, and some were found not fitting and indeed dropped along the line. And that had indeed awakened the judiciary as a system to develop and enhance its in-house cleansing and filtration system. And we are seeing now and witnessing a situation and circumstances whereby the NJC is alive to its responsibility, imposing disciplinary sanctions where necessary, aging out those that are found befitting within the system, and that this, I think, is indeed paying off, which translated to the art of speedy determination of justice, to the art of speedy conviction of people with high-profile cases. Before now, we are living witnesses to the fact that there are cases in the system that had remained for over 10 years without moving an inch in terms of determination. But arising from this attitude of ensuring the integrity is collectively brought to bear between the judiciary and executive working together towards ensuring having a system in place that is indeed built on integrity, that is built on efficiency. We are indeed witnessing a tremendous changes both in the quality of input and the quality of output as it relates to justice, administration of justice.
All right, learned senior advocate, just one last question for you in the meantime before we bring in the other guests, professors of law themselves. The rule of law is the foundation of democracy. How has the administration performed with regard to this?
Well, if you talk of a rule of law, it's not a rule that operates out of the blues. It is a process that is rooted in compliance first, and then in the spirit of compliance, operating within the dictates of the law and prevailing legislations as it relates to each and every item of consideration. For you to arrive at a decision as to whether indeed there exists a compliance with the rule of law within the context of governance, there are certain parameters that you need to bring into consideration. Is the government, in essence, giving effect to judgments and court orders? That is the first question. Within the context of giving effect to judgment and orders, is the government taking advantage of the judicial system by way of submitting to it when the need arises for challenging the judgment and orders that are handed down by the judiciary as an institution that is saddled with the responsibility of judicial determination of issues? So it is not a concept that you take in isolation, but a context, but a subject that you need to factor prevailing judicial, legislative, and associated components of rights that are built into the rule of law as a concept. So where, for example, a decision is taken by a court of law that the federal government should pay 10 million to persons that was said to have earned a decision arising perhaps to a breach of his human right, for example. The question is, must the federal government hook and sinker be submissive to the judgment? Or perhaps maybe the federal government in the circumstances reserve the right to appeal the decision? If taking into consideration the prevailing circumstances, constitutional and otherwise, that vest in you the power to appeal, that vest in you the power to apply for setting aside, that vest in you the power to apply for nullification of the judgment and order, the fact that there exists a breach of rule of law does not arise, because the same rule of law that now supports the sustenance of a judgment of the court vests in you as a government the power to appeal, the power to vary the terms of the judgment, the power to set aside the judgment. And until such time when the process is effectively consummated up to the Supreme Court level, it will be premature, it will be wrong, and indeed out of place for a conclusion that the government is not indeed a government that complies with the rule of law. So what am I trying to say in essence? The rule of law is a component of legality embedded in constitutionality, embedded in statutory and prevailing legislations that sees to the accommodation of the rights embedded within the context of the law. So once there exists a judgment, it does not mean to say that the government must indeed wholeheartedly, unconditionally give effect to the judgment if it indeed desires to give effect to the statutory, constitutional, and legal rights that are vested in it within the context of appeal, within the context of setting aside, and within the context of challenging the decision. It is when the decision is not challenged, or perhaps when the decision the case eventually reaches the apex court, and the apex court has taken a decision, that you can now perhaps maybe make an allegation of non-compliance. Thank you.
So you've not made it really clear, to some of us who don't have a law background to understand that when a determination is taken in a lower court, that you will not consider that case completed until it gets to the Supreme Court, which is, of course, the apex court. Thank you for your...
That is if you take advantage of
the provisions of the law.
Exactly. If you decide to sit on it, just as you are sitting here now.
All right, let's bring in the former governor of Edo State. He's also a professor of law, Professor Osumbo here. And our producer this morning, said something, and he said, look, there has been a struggle for the soul of the judiciary over the years by politicians, maybe in government or in opposition. And he asked this question, has the judiciary been able to cope with the onslaught? And of course, with the coming into power of the current administration, it has one of its mantra to really, try and rejig the system to see whether we can turn things around in that sector. What's your thoughts?
Well, you are right that there had always been a tendency for the executive to ride roughshod over the other branches, the legislature and the judiciary, which is the subject of discussion. If you compare the situation now with what it was in the Second Republic, you will find that tremendous improvements have been recorded. And that is because of the constitutional developments and evolution that have taken place since then. By this, I mean the 1999 Constitution and the amendments that have been made since 1999 have striven quite a great deal to deepen democracy in Nigeria by strengthening the independence of the three arms of government, in order, for instance, that one cannot exercise arbitrary powers to the detriment of the other arms. So this is talking about separation of powers and independence of the various arms of government. You will recall that during the Second Republic and also during the military era, it was common to tune your radio in the morning and you just hear an announcement that a judge has been relieved of his appointment. And that did a great damage to the morale of judges and the integrity of the judiciary. There were other abuses that were inherent in the system. That was what informed the provisions pertaining to the National Judicial Council as you have them now in the 1999 Constitution, so that you cannot just wake up and appoint or dismiss a judge just by mere announcement on the radio or television. There are processes that you have to go through. So to come back to your comment, it's no longer the situation as used to prevail before, that the executive will just deal with judges or the judiciary in any way or manner that they wish. The Constitution is there to set the limits of the powers of the various arms, and where there is disobedience or one arm exercises powers beyond what has been provided for constitutionally, then of course it would not hold. The judiciary is there as the arbiter to rule on this. So, of course, separation of powers does not mean that each of the arms, 3 arms, exist in watertight compartments. There's always one arm complements the other. There's collaboration and cooperation amongst both arms, which is why, as the Honorable Minister and Attorney General of the Federation mentioned, the executive plays a role in the appointment of judges. It doesn't just take hook, line, and sinker recommendations from the NJC. That is something which is new, because the NJC may not have access to some of the information that is available to the executive through some of the law enforcement agencies like EFCC and so forth and so on. In the same way, the legislature, as represented by the National Assembly at the federal level, supports both arms of government, the executive and, in this case, the judiciary. And some of the Constitution, the amendments that we have witnessed in recent parts were initiated by the National Assembly and have gone to strengthen the judiciary, strengthening the powers, including financial independence of the judiciary, not just at the federal level, but at the state level. Those are also initiatives taken by the legislative arm of government to strengthen another arm of government, which is the judiciary. So there will continue to be this cooperation and collaboration. I am particularly happy, and I think by and large the public has been happy with this executive order recently signed by the President, which is to strengthen the judiciary at the state levels. Many people will agree that the judiciary at the federal level fares much better. Just like many institutions, federal institutions fare much better than state institutions, and in this case, even the state judiciary. Because whereas at the federal level, the NJC is more or less in charge of the disbursement of the recurrent and capital expenditure of federal courts, at the state level, it doesn't work as seamlessly as it does at the federal level. This executive order, in my understanding and expectation, will ensure that the level of performance of the state judiciary is elevated beyond what we have known it to be, to a level that is more or less at par with the performance of the federal judiciary. There is, however, a caveat here that whereas the recurrent and capital expenditure of the federal judiciary is collected, controlled, and disbursed by NJC, there is no similar provision for the state judiciary. This may be another reason to revisit the Constitution as to the issue of establishing a state judicial council or whatever, something at the state level that is similar to the NJC at the federal level. People have advocated this in the past, and but the main problem has been something which is somewhat of, I don't know whether it's an anomaly, that we have a federal system, but the federal government appears to be responsible for the payment of the recurrent expenditure of state judiciary. Some people advocate that we devolve the financial resources to the states in order that the states can be responsible for both the capital and recurrent expenditure of the state judiciary. If you were to do that, then it will become compelling to establish a state judicial council that will play a role similar to that which the NJC plays at the federal level.
Okay, Professor Osubo, thank you very much. We'll return to you on the issue of Executive Order 10 in particular, how it will be in practice. Let's bring in now Professor Akinshaya George. Professor Akinshaya George, give us your assessment of the state of the judiciary in 5 years of the Buhari administration.
I think it has been a mixed bag, or it is a mixed bag. You know, in several respects, we have made progress. The judiciary has made significant progress in several respects. Just as, you know, was earlier pointed out, before 2015, when this administration came into place, high-profile corruption cases were never concluded. They started, but they got stuck in the courts. You know, the few that were concluded through plea bargaining, which did not follow any known procedure. You know, however, since 2015, you know, the judiciary has begun, you know, to move quickly with cases, particularly those with high-profile defendants. So that's some progress made. And I must say that, you see, the workload of the judiciary has also increased because of the focus of the administration on anti-corruption. So many cases are going to court, high-profile cases involving billions of money, you know. So we need, therefore, we also need to pay attention to other people who work with the judiciary, like the prosecutors, like the investigators. You know, if you look at the Administration of Criminal Justice Act, for example, it talks about trial of cases, adjournment of corruption cases, adjournment of cases. Criminal cases should not be adjourned for longer than 14 days. That's what it says. We are not meeting that threshold yet. We are still adjourning cases for months, some 2 months, some 3 months. In other words, we are not applying the law as stipulated. But we have made some progress, but there's a great room for improvement. You know, and I want to, you know, wade in on this issue of Executive Order 10. I think this is one of the most significant achievements of this administration. And I do hope that the administration will stand its ground, because I understand there's pressure from some quarters to reverse the Executive Order 10. At the moment, we have a big problem with democracy at the state level. Governors at the state level are like autocrats. They control the local government. Some have not held local government elections for years. A particular state only held local government elections after 5 years of being in office. You know, one of the states, some of the states have not even had local government elections. You know, they control local government, they control the judiciary, they have the state judicial services committees in their pockets, literally. The governors control the political party, particularly in states where there's only one party system. You know, so the checks and balances are not there. But the president has taken this step in the right direction by saying that let us have independence of the judiciary at the state level. Let us deepen our practice of democracy by having an independent legislature. And then if we strengthen democracy at that level, the competition for power at the state level should be less. But because everybody wants to come to the federal, because there's no democracy, there's no shared power at the state level, just wants single individuals control power at the state level. So everybody leaves the state and wants to come to the federal. And when they finish their term as governors, they want to metamorphose to become senators. Because they have controlled so much power, they have amassed so much wealth, they have acquired so much resources. If you look at the Senate now, you need to know the number of former governors that are there. And that can affect the flow of governmental authority. You know, because when you have such people who are retired, who have so much wealth, you know, and who their interests will be different from the interests of the common man. So I think it's a step in the right direction that Executive Order 10 has been signed by the president to activate the provisions of the Constitution. You know, it's not some people are complaining that maybe the president. No. The president is simply applying the provisions of the Constitution. You know, and I think we should support civil society organizations, even the politicians. Everybody should support this executive order because it will strengthen democracy at the state level. Then there'll be less, you know, the excessive, you know, the crave for power at the central should be fairly reduced if people have opportunity to participate effectively at the state level. It's not a situation whereby one man calls the shot. You want to go to the House of Assembly, you must kowtow to the governor. You want to become anything, you want to come to become a minister, you must kowtow to the governor. So I think the administration has done well in this respect. We all need to support the government to ensure that the benefits of independent judiciary at the state level, independent legislature at the state level, of course, just as Professor Sumbo has also said, we also need to put in place mechanism for accountability to ensure that now that more power is coming to the judiciary, more resources should go to the judiciary, more resources for the legislature, there should be guidelines to ensure that these additional powers are not abused. You know, why I do not subscribe to the idea of a separate judicial council at the state level, I think the National Judicial Council can be strengthened. The National Judicial Council can be more better organized, to take care of the judiciary across the country. But for the role that the NJC has played, by now there will have been administration of justice at the state level will have been zero. It is the NJC that has been moderating, that has been protecting the state judiciary from the ever expanding powers of state governors. So I think we may need to strengthen the NJC. Assist them, just as the Honorable the Attorney General talked about filtration process. Because the executive we not just accept the list submitted by the NJC. NJC will now sit up and ensure that only the right people, qualified people, make the list for judicial appointment. And if you appoint the right people to the judiciary, that's the beginning of progress. People who can handle the cost effectively. If you are having heavyweight lawyers and you put in there judges who are not able to understand what the lawyers are saying, then we are all in trouble. But there are good people from all over Nigeria, good people from all over the country, practitioners, academics, people who can sit well on the bench and say, no, this is what the law says, you cannot confuse me. So I think the government is moving in the right direction. If these changes are consolidated, it's good. It will be all the better for the country and for our democracy. Thank you very much.
Yes, if the policy is consolidated, that's a good one, because from all indications, some persons seem to be fighting that executive order 10 at the state level. We, of course, have heard that some governors are kicking against that, especially on the issue of the autonomy for legislature at the state level and, of course, the judiciary. But if time allows us, we could go into that before we end our conversation today. For now, let's go to Kano, where we have Professor Mohammed Tabu, who is also a senior advocate of Nigeria. Now, give us your view of how the judiciary has fared in the last 5 years, keeping in mind the historical perspective of that sector.
Very much. I agree with a lot that has been said about progress, and I particularly want to take up what Professor Osumbo said about the judiciary and the arms of government not being working in isolation. The Constitution adopts the principle of separation of powers, but also allows for checks and balances between the various arms of government. And in this respect, I like to acknowledge the progress that has been made to enable the system work in cooperation rather than in conflict. And since the judiciary operates in a context of rule of law, in a context of collaboration, we all know that whatever improvements we make in the judiciary, it is unlikely to deliver the results unless you have similar improvements in the other sectors of the justice administration. And in this respect, I like to bring in the areas where the Federal Ministry of Justice, the federal government has led to improvements in this cooperation and collaboration in the last 5 to 6 years. In particular, with reference to, for example, the policy on justice that the Honorable Attorney General led to being a forum of consensus building between the various arms of government, the various institutions of the justice sector. This was adopted in 2017 and has been consolidated with the approval of the Federal Executive Council in December last year. And the whole essence of it is that if we are to make progress, there should be a common vision of where we want to get with the justice system. A review of the main challenges that our justice system faces. And when you review, these challenges, you see that you want to, judiciary alone will not be able to do it. National Assembly alone will not be able to do it. Ministries of justice on their own, without institute of justice, will not be able to do it. So this has been a big problem in our justice system, where we have actors in the system that ordinarily are kind of semi-autonomous. You have the National Assembly, you have the Judiciary, you have the Ministries of Justice, you have the police, you have the prison service, with its own head and in policies in its own direction without any system of coordination and kind of strategizing. This problem has been tackled through the Attorney General of the Federation and the support of the Presidency and the federal government and the Executive Council, Federal Executive Council, by developing a policy that now says this is the direction the nation wants to go in terms of improvement in the justice system. And you'll see in that policy various aspects of the challenges of our justice system have been brought up and addressed through consensus. It's not like through imposition, arm of government saying this is where we are going, or institution of government saying this is where we are going, but it is through the building of consensus, and that policy is in place to get the development of the justice system. One other development that I should like to point out, the fact that it has been done to improve criminal justice administration at the level of policy and legislation, and as Professor Akinsey George says, the direction is clear. Now it is up to institutions and actors in the system to now respect what the law says and to implement what the law says. But and even though we know the Administration of Criminal Justice Act was enacted immediately before the administration, I think a lot has been done in order to make it work. One of the ways this has been done is by ensuring that it is also adopted at the state level. You know that in our federal system, do what it can do, the federal government alone cannot change the criminal justice system in our country. There has to be similar, coordinated, commensurate effort at the state level. So when we had the Administration of Criminal Justice Act at the coming in of the, at the end of the last administration and coming in of the present administration, now the challenge is, will everybody now adopt the same system and try to make it work? And through the committee that I chair in the Federal Ministry of Justice, I think a lot of progress has been made in the sense that in 2015, we had only the federal legislation, before which there was a similar administration of criminal justice law in 3 states of the Federation alone. Now, at the last count this year, now this new legislation has been adopted in additional 25 states in the last 5 to 6 years, so that we now have at least 29 states of the Federation agreeing to a common policy, a common understanding, and a common direction for improving criminal justice administration. Now, we also know that, reform and improvement is always work in progress. It does not mean the objectives and the purposes for which that law was created has been achieved. To the contrary, I think there is a lot of resistance, there is a lot of lack of understanding, there's also a lot of lack of accountability in the system, which need to be addressed. But having a framework that allows that to be addressed is very, very important. When you didn't have a consensus, when you didn't have a common direction, when you didn't have a framework like that, it's very, very difficult, probably even impossible, to think that at any stage in the future the problem will be addressed. So I will agree with what has been said about progress, but we all know reform is work in progress. And we also know that there are a lot of other things that need to be addressed. For instance, what has been said about accountability. We have now this executive order, we have the review of the Constitution, we have every effort indicating commitment and intention and determination by the federal government to give autonomy and to improve the independence of the judiciary at the state level. But that's
all right, Professor Mohammed Tabu, thank you very much for your comments. I know that both yourself and Professor Akinshaye George are champions of the administration of criminal justice Act 2015. But we hope that we have the opportunity of also speaking to that in the light of the recent Supreme Court decision with regard to cases that are usually abandoned and started de novo once a judge who is presiding over the case goes upstairs. And that's a very critical segment of that law. So if you have 25 states or more that have already adopted it, we hope that the respective state House of Assembly will also look into that provision in their various laws. Let's come back to the studios here and bring in again the Attorney General of the Federation and Minister of Justice. The President Buhari administration since 2015 has passed a number of pieces of legislation. But we have also seen a recourse to the use of executive orders, which of course is being discussed now in the context of EO10. Why are we seeing this recourse, as it were, to executive orders?
Well, you see, in the ordinary course of business, legislations in their own right are intended or expected to establish a ground norm, a foundation for action, a policy declaration, a statement of position of the government. But whatever legislation you look or you take and look at in its own right requires certain actions by institutions and agencies for its effective implementation, for it to effectively come to life. Now, when you talk of democracy in its own right, as established by our Constitution, that governance and leadership in the Nigerian state context should be on the basis of democracy and social justice. Without complementing legislations, without supporting guidelines, without supporting executive orders, there is no way you can bring the constitutional declaration and context of democracy and social justice into action, into life. And that, in effect, makes what necessary, makes further legislations necessary, and that was indeed what brought about the Electoral Act into place for the purpose of fine-tuning the processes of achieving the democracy as enshrined in the Constitution. And what happens further to the Electoral Act? The electoral guidelines that are being periodically developed by INEC as an institution for the purpose of what? Seeing that the democratic culture established by the Constitution is now made a reality. So you can now see that legislations in their own right requires certain collaborative institutional actions for them now to be efficiently deployed into action and into reality. Now, when you talk of an autonomy, for example, of the state legislature arising from Section 121, subsection 3 of the Constitution. Take it that the Constitution establishes that there should be autonomy, financial autonomy for the state judiciary and state legislature. The question is there no demand, is there no request for institutional action to bring it to effect or to life? And that is where perhaps further supporting legislative process or indeed executive order process or perhaps executive directions or directives and instructions comes into play to complement, support, and enhance and ensure the realization of the ground norm, the realization of this constitutional provision as established in the Constitution. So what I'm trying to say, or level to say in essence, is the legislations in their own right requires certain actions, either executive, legislative, or indeed judicial, for that matter, for the purpose of bringing them to effect, bringing them to life, and fine-tuning the process and ensuring at the end of the day that the concept envisaged by the main legislation is indeed achieved. So if you are now talking of the autonomy of the state legislature and the state judiciary as contained in the Constitution simply says there should be autonomy and financial independence. Is it enough? What comes to question is, how do we now realize and effect it? And then the Constitution, in its own right, has gone further to provide an answer. Section 5 is categorical that the maintenance and execution of the Constitution is the responsibility of the President. So if the President has a responsibility to maintain and execute the Constitution, and then the Constitution goes further in Section 121 to Section 3 to state that there exists an autonomy, or the autonomy of the state legislature and judiciary is now recognized. Is it not in essence the responsibility of the President arising from his executive powers within the context and spirit of Section 5 of the Constitution to maintain and execute the provision of Section 121 as it relates to the autonomy? So in essence, Section 5 of the Constitution that vests the power and the responsibility on the President to maintain and execute the Constitution has further responsibility using the instruments, establishments, and institutions at his disposal to ensure the realization of the provision of Section 121 of Section 3, and that stands the position of the law. Except perhaps if you are saying in essence that the constitutional powers vested in the President of maintaining and executing the Constitution does not indeed have, the President does not have those constitutional power. But where the President is vested with the constitutional power to maintain and execute the Constitution, and the Constitution says there should be autonomy for the state legislature and state judiciary, the President has extraordinary powers, has additional powers and responsibility to bring to bear the existing institutions, establishments, and perhaps legislations to ensure.
I just want to carry on this before you comment. Honorable Minister, let's clarify this for the purpose of some of our viewers who may not have legal or constitutional background. Yeah. When you referenced repeatedly Section 5, vesting in the President the powers to enforce or implement the provisions of the Constitution, you need to clarify that, because the governors, who are also members of the executive, also have powers to also implement and enforce the Constitution. So Section 5 relates to the executive, so that somebody doesn't wake up and say, you're a governor, you don't have powers to enforce or implement the Constitution.
Well, as you rightly stated, indeed, the powers to maintain and execute the Constitutions are collective responsibilities. But the issue is, does the Constitution, in one way or the other, derogate the powers of the President as it relates to the execution and maintenance of the Constitution? The answer is it does not. So if perhaps the state governors do indeed have constitutional powers to maintain and execute the constitution as well, so it calls for what? Collaboration, collaborative action in indeed maintenance and execution of the constitution. So within the context of collaboration, the responsibility both of the president and the governors is to see to the enforcement of the autonomy as established by Section 121 and not to negate, derogate, or undermine that autonomy within the context of the Constitution. So the governors do not indeed have the powers to derogate or perhaps undermine the autonomy that has been established by the Constitution, but to work in tandem, in collaboration and cooperation with the president in ensuring that the autonomy that has indeed been established by the Constitution is indeed established. So the context of execution and maintenance of the Constitution has been commonly shared by the president and indeed the governors is that of collaboration in seeing to the execution of the spirit of the Constitution and not otherwise.
Honourable Minister, actually, you've done that explanation, elaborately, but then collaboration is optional here, from what I can understand as a layman, because we're talking about executive powers, domiciled, and they are the presidency, and of course at the level of the state governors, as the case may be. And that is one of the reasons why some policies, some national policies, do not cascade down to the state and local government level to be able to, of course, impact positively on Nigerians, the common Nigerians who are more in the local areas. Now, my issue is this, and I want Professor Osumbo, before we take a break, let's say get to Governor Osumbo to either perhaps speak to some of the points that he has raised, and again to the issue of the fact that, look, we are a nation. We have a constitution. We have had constitutions. We have had reforms. We have had amendments of constitutions. Yet, we're still having issues with the judicial system, which, of course, interprets the law itself. Now, the Constitution says that the president has overall power. He has this Order 10 in question now. And if the judiciary does not have the autonomy that it requires to run that system effectively and efficiently, then of course they'll be working for the governors who have the ultimate power at the state level. Now, you have been a governor and you know what it means to run a state. Now, why is it difficult for governors to accept this Order 10? Because they have come out to say clearly that they are against it. So why? You're a lawyer as well. So why is it so? Is there any
He was
benefit?
also chairman of the Senate Judicial Committee.
Exactly. So why is it so difficult for them to accept that, to collaborate with the president, as the minister rightly said?
Well, Kirian, I find it quite curious, actually. First of all, I am reluctant to paint all governors with the same brush. I wouldn't think that there's unanimous opposition to what has happened. Maybe some, but certainly not all governors. And speaking for myself, when I was in office as governor, I respected the independence of the judiciary, given my own background and experience. And if you ask any of them who were there in those state judiciary when I was there, they had it very good. Let me put it that way. And I respected the authority of the judiciary, even the legislature itself. I find it somewhat disingenuous that a governor would be derelict in allowing the provisions of the Constitution to work as they are intended to work. By this, I mean that whatever is due to the judiciary from the Consolidated Revenue Fund of the state is made available to the heads of courts in the state. I find it difficult to understand why such a governor who does not want to respect the letter and spirit of the Constitution now being clamoring in opposition against this executive order. I wouldn't support that, and I don't think that ultimately that is an opposition, a clamor that is likely to succeed, because the forces that support these changes as being good for the deepening of democracy, as being in consonance with the tenets of good governance, are by far more weighty and larger in number than the forces that are against. So I believe that it is something which is positive, which is useful, and which will come to stay, because some governors have not allowed those provisions to work as they ought to work. And really, the governors, they have a lot on their hands, given what is available to spend for execution of government projects. That is within the appropriation made for the executive. There is a lot. So I don't see why they should be in opposition against appropriation or releases to the other arms of government, whether to the state houses of assembly or the state judiciary. This is something which maybe if they've not been doing it before, they should realize that that is how good governance is intended to operate and should operate. Talking about appreciation of the nature and significance of executive orders, because again it is new in this part of the world. In the US, from where we borrowed the federal constitution that we are operating, nobody will raise any eyebrow about executive orders because it's part of their normal system of governance. The president does issue executive orders to be able to bring about good implementation of the provisions of the Constitution. Where there are impediments, then it is within the powers of the president to issue. And even the governors now are issuing executive orders at the state level. So you can't be opposing executive orders at the federal level while you are issuing executive orders at the state level. And then there is a hierarchy of laws. Lawyers know that there is a hierarchy. The basic law, which people refer to as the ground norm, is the Constitution. Beneath the Constitution, you have other legislation at the federal level, acts of the National Assembly. Beneath that, you have delegated subsidiary legislation or delegated legislation beneath that. Also, perhaps beneath that, you now have this executive order. So it's within the hierarchy of laws. So this should be understood, and I believe that by and by people will come to see it as part of the processes of enthroning good governance in Nigeria. But I hope, let me just quickly say, I don't know if I will have the time to say this, with respect to the rule of law, which was a question that was posed.
I was going to come back to that, but you have the floor.
Okay.
Yes.
Is that there's always a tendency to feel that rule of law is only for government to respect. But that is wrong. When people are talking about the rule of law, they say government is not obeying rule of law. The individuals also have a duty to respect the law. Rule of law means the people conducting and governments conducting their businesses in accordance with the law, not in accordance with the human nature. It's not rule of man. The difference is, should we be governed by rule of man or rule of law? And over centuries, as society has evolved, we have come to see that the best form of governance is one that is located within the rule of law. Individuals, private, government must subject themselves to the dictates of the law. So I just want to use this opportunity to emphasize that rule of law is not only something meant for government alone.
All right, Professor Osumbo, thank you very much. And then, gentlemen, we're going to take a short break now. But just before we do, just to indeed re-emphasize one of the points that Professor Osumbo made with regard to the hierarchy of laws, starting out from the Constitution right down to, as he indicated, executive orders. We haven't had any experience so far where the provisions of an executive order were or are in conflict with any of the other laws above it. We'll take a short break now. When we return, we'll continue with the conversation.
Nigerians, coronavirus is dangerous. It can kill. When you see this sign, high fever, cough, shortness of breath, drowsiness, pneumonia, don't panic, don't hide, don't embark in self-medication. Promptly visit the nearest medical facility. Report all cases to the nearest hospital. Prevention is key. Avoid contact with infected persons. Avoid crowded areas as much as possible. Wash your hands regularly. Use hand sanitizers. Your life is precious. Stay alive. Live long, live right. This message is sponsored by the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture and the Nigerian Film Corporation. Nigerian Film Corporation, powering possibility.
As a strong immune system increases the chances of victims surviving COVID-19, a corruption-free society creates opportunities for citizens to thrive and prosper. Build your immunity. Stop corruption now. Report all acts of corruption to ICPC on this toll-free number 0800 22 55 4272. This message is brought to you by ICPC and NTA.
Nigerians, let us take responsibility. Stay healthy, stay safe, and curb the spread of the virus. Take responsibility. The coronavirus spreads from one person to another. Let us avoid crowd gathering of any kind for any reason. Take responsibility. Avoid traveling from one state to another during these lockdown restrictions. Obey all the rules that are put in place. Take responsibility. Stop spreading fake news and unverified reports about the coronavirus. There is no known cure for COVID-19. Take responsibility. Observe all the measures that can help stop the spread of the virus. Together, we can do this, but only if we take responsibility. This message is brought to you by the Nigerian Television Authority, NTA, Africa's largest television network.
Welcome back, and it's Good Morning Nigeria live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. Let's once again bring in Professor Akinseye Judge. Professor Akinseye Judge, I want to return to the issue of the rule of law. Professor Osumbo made a point, and earlier the Attorney General of the Federation did talk about the amplitude of the rule of law. What is your assessment of the rule of law under the Buhari administration 5 years on, against the background of certain observations that, yes, while you can see the rule of law being observed, say, at the highest of levels of the executive branch, some agencies of government tend to operate at a tangent, and sometimes it's with difficulty, according to the observers, that the Attorney General, who is the Chief Law Officer of the Federation, reins in these, shall we say, errant agencies.
Talking about the rule of law, I subscribe to the definition earlier given, that it is a situation where the business of government, is conducted in accordance with the provisions of the law. And not just the letters of the law, but also the spirit of the law. And that takes us back to the conversation we were having as regards the executive powers, at the federal level as well as at the state level. Now, democracy in Nigeria, as far as from my own study, is functional, is working at the federal level because we have checks and balances. But as far as I'm concerned, what we have at the level of state government, most state governments, just as the learned professor has said, we shouldn't, maybe some may be doing the right, but predominantly from our study, the practice of democracy at the state level does not exist. So what we have is the rule of man rather than the rule of law. You have a single individual controlling the executive council. The usual debate of memos by ministers, informed discussion. It doesn't happen. Once the governor has spoken, that's the end of the discussion. Many commissioners don't even have power to spend money. Everything must be approved by the president, by the governor. Traditional rulers, everybody kowtows to the governor. State Assembly, Speaker has to beg to the governor. Look at this, the one has a State House of Assembly. The ceiling of the assembly collapsed. I'm sure due to poor maintenance. The ceiling came down while the people were having legislative session. In a particular state now, a governor goes out and demolishes buildings without respect for the rule of law. And the judiciary in that state is quiet. It is because there's no democracy at the state level. We need to reorganize the system.